Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of What Happened. I'm here today to talk about something that shook an entire nation just yesterday. February 10th, 2026. A date that the small community of Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia will never forget. A quiet Tuesday afternoon that transformed into one of Canada's deadliest school incidents in decades. Now, before we dive into this, I want to be clear about something. This is a sensitive topic that affected real families, real children, and a real community. We're going to approach this with the respect and care it deserves, while trying to understand what actually happened in this remote Canadian town that most people had never heard of until yesterday. So let's look back at what unfolded. Tumbler Ridge is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Picture this. A town of just 2,400 people nestled in the foothills of the Canadian Rocky Mountains, about 1,000 kilometers north of Vancouver. It's so remote that you'd have to drive for hours just to reach the nearest major city. This is a community where the mayor, Daryl Krakovka, doesn't call people residents, he calls them family. And after 18 years of living there, he says he probably knows every single person in town. The heart of this community's educational system is Tumbler Ridge Secondary School, a small high school serving grades 7 through 12 with just 175 students. It's the kind of school where teachers know not just their students, but their families, their siblings, their dreams. On any given Tuesday, you'd find teenagers rushing between classes, maybe complaining about homework, planning for the upcoming weekend. Normal teenage stuff, but February 10th wasn't going to be a normal Tuesday. At exactly 1:20 in the afternoon, something changed everything. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP, received a call that would send shockwaves across the nation. There was an active shooter at Tumbler Ridge Secondary School. Now, let me paint you a picture of what this means for a place like Tumbler Ridge. The local RCMP detachment is tiny. This isn't Toronto or Vancouver with massive police resources. But here's what's remarkable. Despite being in such a remote location, officers were on scene within 2 minutes. 2 minutes? That response time would be impressive in any major city, but in a small mountain town, it likely saved lives. The school immediately went into lockdown. Students who were just minutes before thinking about lunch or their next class suddenly found themselves hiding in classrooms, supply closets, anywhere they could find safety. One grade 9 student later told reporters about hiding in a closet with other children, not understanding what was happening, just knowing they needed to stay quiet and stay safe. 7-year-old Quinn Campbell found herself trapped in an equipment room with older students and a teacher. Can you imagine being in grade 7, just 12 or 13 years old, and suddenly your normal school day becomes a fight for survival? The older students tried to keep her spirits up, tried to make sure she wouldn't panic. Her father later credited the teachers who went above and beyond to protect the kids in that room. But while students were hiding and officers were racing to respond, the unthinkable was already happening inside the school. The suspect, described by police as a female with brown hair wearing a dress, had begun what would become one of Canada's deadliest school incidents. Witnesses suggested she started on the ground floor before moving upstairs. As officers entered the building to locate the threat, they discovered a scene no one should ever have to see. 6 people were found dead inside the school. 6 lives cut short in a place that should have been safe, should have been about learning and growing and friendship. The shooter was also found dead from what appeared to be a self-inflicted injury. But the tragedy wasn't confined to just the school building. As the investigation unfolded, police discovered that 2 more victims had been found dead at a residential location that they believed was connected to the incident. One additional victim died while being transported to the hospital, despite the efforts of medical personnel who airlifted critically injured victims to receive treatment. The final count was devastating. 10 people dead, including the shooter. 27 others were injured, with some fighting for their lives in hospitals across the region. For over 4 hours, from 1:20 p.m. until 5:45 p.m., the community remained in lockdown. Imagine being a parent in Tumbler Ridge during those hours. Your child is somewhere in that school, and you don't know if they're safe. You're getting alerts to shelter in place. You're seeing emergency vehicles racing through your small town, and all you can do is wait and pray. Chris Norbury, a local district councillor, experienced this nightmare firsthand. His wife works at the high school. His 5-year-old daughter attends the nearby elementary school. When the lockdown notice came, he didn't know if his family was safe. That's the reality for so many parents yesterday. The agonizing wait, the desperate hope, the fear of the unknown. Local journalist Trent Ernst, who runs the Tumbler Ridge news site, got a message on Facebook about reports of an active shooter. These kinds of things occasionally happen, he thought. False alarms, maybe a misunderstanding. But when he drove to the school, he found all the roads blocked off. Then he saw RCMP vehicles racing toward a home near the town center. That's when he knew this wasn't a false alarm. The broader community felt the impact immediately. Schools across the region went into lockdown. The nearby elementary school eventually released students to their parents around 5 p.m., but both the elementary and secondary schools announced they would remain closed for the rest of the week. When the news broke nationally, it sent shockwaves across Canada. School shootings are remarkably rare in the country, often attributed to Canada's strict gun control laws. The deadliest school shooting in Canadian history remains the École Polytechnique massacre in Montreal in 1989, where 14 women were killed. Tuesday's incident in Tumbler Ridge became one of the worst in Canadian history. Prime Minister Mark Carney was so affected by the news that he suspended a planned trip to Halifax and Munich. He was supposed to announce a major defense strategy and attend an international security conference, but instead found himself addressing a grieving nation. "I join Canadians in grieving with those whose lives have been changed irreversibly today," he said, and in gratitude for the courage and selflessness of the first responders who risked their lives to protect their fellow citizens. British Columbia Premier David Eby called it an unimaginable tragedy and praised the rapid response of local police. "That speed and professionalism saved lives today," he said, noting that officers were on scene within 2 minutes of the initial call. But perhaps the most heartbreaking reaction came from Mayor Krakovka himself. During a Facebook live stream earlier in the day, he had been updating the community as information became available. When he finally had to read the RCMP press release announcing the full death toll, he could barely hold back his emotions. "I don't know what to say, other than be strong. Stay safe. Hold your kids tonight if you have them," he said at the end of his live stream. Then he paused and corrected himself. "No, not a good day." That's when the reality hit him, and all of us watching. In a community of 2,400 people, losing 10 residents isn't just a statistic, it's devastating. "I probably know every one of the victims," the mayor said later. In Tumbler Ridge, this wasn't just a news story. This was family. The investigation has now been turned over to the RCMP Major Crime Unit, and they're facing the complex task of piecing together what led to this tragedy. Superintendent Ken Floyd acknowledged that they may never fully understand the why behind this tragedy, but they're committed to determining exactly what happened. The identity of the shooter hasn't been released, and police haven't speculated about motive or how the victims might have been connected to the suspect. What makes this case particularly challenging is the multiple locations involved. The fact that victims were found both at the school and at a residential location suggests this wasn't a random act of violence, but rather something more targeted and complex. Investigators will need to trace the connections, understand the sequence of events, and hopefully provide some answers to a grieving community. But even as the investigation continues, questions are already being raised about broader issues. How do we prevent tragedies like this? What warning signs might have been missed? How do we support communities dealing with this level of trauma? These are conversations that will continue long after the immediate crisis has passed. What we do know raises difficult questions. How does something like this happen in a small, tight-knit community? What drives someone to commit such an act of violence? These are questions that investigators, mental health professionals, and the community itself will be grappling with for a long time. But in the immediate aftermath, what we're seeing is something remarkably human. Hockey legend Hayley Wickenheiser, who had trained with Olympic athletes in Tumbler Ridge back in 2010, called it a beautiful, quaint town and said her heart hurt for the families affected. Her words remind us that Tumbler Ridge isn't just a dot on a map. It's a place where people have built lives, raised families, created memories. The community's response tells us everything about who these people are. In the hours after the shooting, neighbors were checking on neighbors. Local businesses opened their doors to provide shelter and support. The recreation center became an impromptu gathering place where people could find comfort in each other's presence while they waited for news about their loved ones. This is what small communities do. They rally around each other in times of crisis. But this particular crisis feels different because it strikes at the heart of what should be the safest place in any community: the school. These are the hallways where kids learn, where they make friends, where they discover who they want to become. Yesterday, those same hallways became a place of unimaginable trauma. Pastor George Rowe from the Tumbler Ridge Fellowship Baptist Church went to the recreation center where families were waiting for news about their loved ones. "It was devastating," he told reporters. "It was a situation you never really want to face again." But he was there, providing support, being present in the community's darkest hour. That's what we're seeing across Tumbler Ridge right now. A community in pain, but a community coming together. Premier Eby asked all British Columbians to wrap the people of Tumbler Ridge with love, not just tonight, but tomorrow and into the future. And here's the thing. This tragedy will reverberate through this community for years to come. In a town where everyone knows everyone, where the mayor calls residents family, the impact of losing 10 people is immeasurable. Children who survived will carry these memories. Families will have empty chairs at dinner tables. Teachers and staff will have to find ways to create a sense of safety and normalcy again. But if there's anything we can learn from tragedies like this, it's the incredible resilience of human communities. Tumbler Ridge has faced challenges before: economic downturns when mines closed, wildfires threatening the town, the kinds of hardships that small communities often endure. Mayor Krakovka said they've always come together before, stood together, survived together. "I hope we can fall back on that experience," he said. Right now, the community is focused on healing, on supporting the families affected, on trying to process something that feels impossible to process. Mental health supports are being brought in. The investigation continues. And slowly, carefully, this small community in the Canadian Rockies will begin the long journey of healing. The story of what happened in Tumbler Ridge isn't just about violence or tragedy. It's also about the first responders who ran toward danger. It's about teachers who protected their students. It's about older kids comforting younger ones in equipment rooms. It's about a community that refuses to let darkness define them. Think about the teachers who made split-second decisions to protect their students. Think about the RCMP officers who raced into an active shooting situation without hesitation. Think about the medical personnel who airlifted critically injured victims, fighting to save lives even as the community was reeling from loss. Think about the parents who stayed strong for their children even as they processed their own trauma. These are the stories that often get lost in the headlines and statistics, but they're the ones that matter most. They remind us that even in humanity's darkest moments, there are people who choose courage, who choose compassion, who choose to stand between danger and innocence. The students who comforted each other in hiding spots around the school, the teachers who put themselves at risk to protect kids who weren't even their own, the community members who opened their doors and their hearts to neighbors in need. These acts of heroism and humanity are part of what happened in Tumbler Ridge too, and they deserve to be remembered alongside the tragedy. As we continue to follow this story, let's remember that behind every statistic, every news report, every update, there are real people dealing with unimaginable loss. The families grieving, the survivors processing trauma, the community working to rebuild a sense of safety and hope. What happened in Tumbler Ridge reminds us how precious and fragile life can be, and how important it is to look out for each other, to build supportive communities, and to never take for granted the everyday moments that make life beautiful. That's all for today's episode. If this story affected you, please reach out to someone you trust or to mental health resources in your area. Take care of each other, hold your loved ones close, and I'll see you in the next one.